Cloud. All right, we are good to go. Susan.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark, and thanks to the Chamber for having us back again today. We're really excited to be part of this series. And as you mentioned, Mark, this is the webinar 2 of 3 in this series. We're going to be covering during the course of employment during this conversation, and the first webinar, which was around pre-employment, is on the YouTube channel. So why don't we first get started? This is your distinguished panel for today, myself, Sam Smith, and Steve Brown. And we're going to just go around briefly and introduce ourselves, and then we will get into the content right after a brief agenda. So we're going to introduce ourselves. We're going to give you a little bit of housekeeping, which is just kind of setting the stage for what to expect during this conversation. Our goal is really to give you a high-level overview. All of you represent different businesses, different industries, different size of employers. We recognize that. And so we'll just have a couple of reminders to keep top of mind as you listen to what we're sharing today. We'd also love for you to use the chat. I think that's a great way for all three of us, as well as Mark and Amy on the line, to help us kind of field your questions and make sure that they get answered. And as Mark mentioned, the three of us are here to help support whatever needs you might have as well outside this forum. So we'll talk a little bit about ourselves in a minute. So as I mentioned, the 3-part series, we're going to be talking about the course of employment today. And then webinar 3 of 3, which is coming up in September on the 18th, also at 10 a.m., is going to be talking about the end or and beyond employment. So what are some of the laws that are changing related to that point in the employment relationship? And then the majority of our time will be spent on the presentation. And of course, we've reserved some time for the Q&A as well. Also, as I mentioned before at the start, that our goal is to provide you really with an overview, a high-level summary. So all of you, again, represent different businesses and sizes. And so this is really intended for your general awareness. You know your businesses best. All of us here on the panel can also help you understand a little bit more about applicability, depending on what your question might be. But remember, not everything is one size fits all. And as I know our friend Steve here is going to mention, there are a lot of idiosyncrasies. There's a lot of unknowns still, and we're all navigating this together. But our goal is to make sure that you get at least an awareness. By knowing that these things are happening, they will help empower you as you're going through your course of business. We also are mentioning here that we're talking about some Maryland-specific laws. We also will cover and touch on a few federal laws. It's really hard not to have a little bit of overlay there. Some of those are changing. As you all know, things change often. This may not be an all-inclusive list. Things, as you saw with minimum wage at the beginning of this year, things can move very quickly. They can change, and we're doing our best to make sure that we get you informed, but just remember that this may not be an all-inclusive list at any point in time. It's never a substitute for legal advice. If you need some legal advice, Steve Brown is here to help you, and that's what it's for, really to try to apply it directly to your business, and again, any situation with your direct employee-employer relationship might require some more I would call it more reference around some of the other elements of your business that need to be considered. And my favorite, which is small businesses are not exempt from knowing the laws and following them. So the three of us know all too well, both based on our previous experiences and current, that many businesses today may feel that they are exempt or immune, or that they haven't heard of anyone or have not yet experienced any sort of lawsuit or trouble. You may be in the unique minority, and good for you, but unfortunately, that is not the case most oftentimes. We also are seeing enforcement that is really increasing. And what I mean by that is, why would lawmakers put all of this into play without enforcing it? The goal is they want the change to happen, and then they set out parts of different government agencies to go out and make sure it's happening. And so I had an employer ask me this question the other day, well, how will I show up on a list? Well, they might decide that they're going to, pick all employers that are a certain size in a certain area and whatever have you. And if you show up on that list, you might be getting a call or a knock on the door. So same way you might experience IRS audits, the same thing happens with the Department of Labor and other agencies. So big takeaway there is remember that you are not exempt from following the laws. And the fact that you were on this webinar is a great indication that you obviously recognize that and want to make sure you're doing something about it. So big kudos and applause to you. So now let's go into meeting our presenters and then we'll get into the content. So I'm going to stop talking after I introduce myself and hand it over to my other colleagues here. I am Susan Mahaffey and I own PeopleRise. PeopleRise is a HR consultancy. We focus on people advisory, HR advisory, and I also have an executive coaching practice. Some of the things that I work with small to mid-sized businesses on is really trying to get a handle on your organization, the health of it related to the people. I like to equate that as like a wellness check, how are things operating? I also work with a lot of businesses who are in growth mode, those who are looking to continue to grow their businesses, expand, some in M&A and acquisition. And then also on my coaching practice, really helping leaders untangle their workplace challenges. A lot of times we have business leaders who are overwhelmed by all of their employee responsibilities and their the everyday human. So if those are challenges or sound like you, feel free to reach out. And if you go to my website, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, which has a lot of good info in it, including some information about today's, one of today's topics around pay transparency and payroll stubs from Sam. So with that, I'll hand it to you, Sam.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. I'm Samantha Smith. I'm the owner of People Operations Partners. We're a fractional and outsourced payroll consulting firm. We specialize in payroll and HRIS implementations and migrations, training and development, compliance audits, risk management, really just making sure our clients have a foundation, a solid foundation in payroll and HR. You can find out more or reach out for a discovery call by going to our website. We also have a newsletter you can subscribe to there. And I'm happy to be back with the panel here again. I'll pass it along to Stephen Brown for his introduction.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I am Stephen Brown. I am an equity partner with the law firm McAllister, Detar, Showalter, and Walker. I've been doing employment law for over a decade, and it is a constantly changing and a very difficult place to sort of keep up with as a small business owner. And to echo Susan's comments, we are constantly seeing small to mid-sized businesses saying, well, that's not what everybody else is doing. Well, don't let you become the test case. Don't let you be the example that your friends start saying, "Whoa, they got whacked, so I better do the right thing." Do the right thing from the beginning. Chase this stuff down. It's very important. Regardless of the size of your business, you've got employment obligations that stretch the gambit of whether it be minimum wage pay or all the way up to FTC anti-competitive actions. These things all flow through your business, no matter really what field you're in. So pay attention, know that it's serious. It's not a cost center, it's a cost prevention center for your HR services. So, again, indicating by you guys being here, you're taking it seriously. When it usually gets to my level, it means it's going to be a far more costly venture if we're litigating to defend your company from, whether it's a class action lawsuit or a one-off lawsuit. Litigation's expensive. The only people who enjoy being in the courtroom are me. Judge doesn't want to be there, jury doesn't want to be there, you don't want to be there. So, at the end of the day, heed our advice, take the steps, contact Susan, contact Sam, contact me. We'll try to keep you out of hot water in the employment space. So with that, I think I turn it back to Susan to get on with the show.
Thank you both. Well, first up, we're going to be talking about pay, which is going to go over Sam in just a second. So we broke this down into a few different sections. We're going to talk about things related to pay. We're going to talk about leave, safety, and then classification. So these are the kind of 4 areas that we'll touch upon today. And we're going to hand it to Sam next, who is our guru on the pay side.
Okay, so I won't spend a lot of time on this one, but we want to start with a reminder about Maryland's salary posting requirement, which is part of the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act, since this kind of flows into the employment phase. If you missed our last webinar, please check it out for more detailed information. But as a quick recap, Maryland employers are now required to include a wage range, a general description of benefits, and any other applicable compensation, like the bonus shown here, in any internal or external job posting. The key here for employment is that the law prohibits, or for the employment phase after the initial recruiting and hiring phase, is that the law prohibits employers from retaliating against an employee for requesting wage range information. It still surprises me that many of the business owners I speak to are surprised that employees are allowed to discuss compensation and request wage range information. You cannot take any adverse employment action against an employee for this. Again, there's more to this, like the definition of what is considered a posting and the record keeping requirements, which you'll want to familiarize yourself with. And while we're on the topic of equal pay, I like to take the opportunity to remind everyone to review your current employees' pay and conduct an equity audit to address any pay gaps if you haven't made this a routine process. You'll want to verify that the salaries are consistent or that a legitimate system or factor justifies any pay disparities. We can move on to the next slide, please, Susan. So we have some new pay notice requirements to make you aware of. Starting on October 1st, pay stubs issued to employees working in Maryland must include the following information for each pay period: the employer's name, address, and phone number, the date of the payment, and the beginning and end dates of the applicable pay period, the total number of hours worked during the pay period for employees that are not exempt from overtime laws, the rate of pay, the gross and net pay earned in the pay period, the amount and name of all deductions, a list of all additional pay included in the paycheck, and for employees paid at a piece rate, if that's you, the applicable piece rate, and the number of pieces completed. So that's a lot of information, but if you are on one of these larger payroll platforms, a lot of cloud-based platforms, they already provide this information to your employees. I think that it's just going to be a matter of confirming with your payroll company, checking out your pay stubs, that that all that information is there. If you are in a business that, you know, is still manually running payroll, or you you have some software that requires updates and nobody's keeping an eye on those updates, just make sure that your software is in compliance. And then currently, at the time of hiring, employers must give notice regarding the rate of pay, regular pay days, and leave benefits. Some people aren't doing this formally in writing. It's now a requirement. You know, we hope that you're using proper offer letters and pay stubs, but if not, you should definitely consider updating your processes. Susan and I help our clients out with things like that all the time, just making sure that we do compliance audits, making sure everything is in order. Some of these things get swept under the rug after they're initially implemented, and they really need to be monitored on a regular basis. The penalties can add up if you're not following these requirements, so that's a good time to audit your processes. You will also be required to withhold and or remit payment to the state for the new family and medical leave insurance program. which Susan is going to talk more about now, but you'll want to ensure your payroll system is set up properly for any deductions and remittance to the state.
Sam, thank you for that. One question to build on that, I know a few people have been asking, is around, if I have a payroll provider, won't they just handle that for me? And I heard you say you'd want to confirm. Do you have any other suggestions around that?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times, and I actually recently had a client ask me this question about, the liability the payroll provider has, and really have to remember it's a software platform at the end of the day. They do put a lot of onus on the employer. You want to review your contract and see what is your responsibility. Some of these things are, automatically updated and compliant, but you'll just want to ensure to cover yourself that everything's up to speed.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you. So let's move. So I'm going to pick up on what you just mentioned, Sam, which is about revisions to family, the family and medical leave insurance. So this implementation is essentially about providing benefits for workers in the state that is going to allow them to take time away from work to care for themselves or a family member and be paid up to $1,000 a week for up to 12 weeks. There are some states that already do something similar. I've worked in the state of Massachusetts that has something similar, so I've had some experience with this. There's a couple things I would mention. The implementation to putting this into action has been further delayed until July 1st, 2025, which means that employers are going to need to pay into the system. Sometimes I like to use the example of, I'm going to use Social Security for just a second. The idea that is that an employer is going to be responsible for remitting an amount of money to pay into this system. And then from that system, the dollars will be extracted and paid to the employees, who then get to file for benefits. So July 1st of 2026 is when benefits are set to begin. But a year prior is the timeline where we're looking for employers to begin remitting. I can tell you many people have asked about how much, what does this look like? How much, do I put aside? I don't know the answer to that question. And I don't know, Steve or Sam, if you have any details on that, and I'll ask you in a second. But the idea here is we're really all waiting to hear much more. I will say that my personal opinion is that I wouldn't be surprised if implementation could take a bit longer. Not sure. There is a website dedicated to this, and you would be able to see that in the recording. And when we send out the checklist, there's a place where you can also sign up on the Maryland Department of Labor's website, where you can get more information and keep up to speed with the implementation and these details. But I think this is a very important piece of legislation and a new benefit that is going to be very important for small businesses to pay attention to. There's going to be a huge learning curve, and also people will probably be unsure of understanding, how does this work? How do you file? How do you get the amounts and so forth? Employers will also be able to receive information about the employee claims. So obviously those who've applied, you'll get to know. I think this is going to be something that will really, the intention I think is quite good, but I will be interested to see how this impacts businesses, because it will add another additional expense. Sam and Steve, any builds on family?
Yeah, I think as of right now, so, we're still facing one more General Assembly session between, sort of a go live date, right? So we could still see changes. We could see another delay. Delay is not out of the realm of thinking. I would say that Delaware's version is supposed to start collecting benefits January 1. So, when you're looking around, we're very much a monkey see, monkey do state. And you look around to our peer states, sister states, what they're doing, if folks are sort of moving with some of these things, I think that's an indicator that, there's going to be a strong press for it to go into effect. I think right now the percentage was, right now on the website, it's 90% of covered wages up to the Social Security cap. equally split between workers and employers. So basically roughly 1% of your salary for the person is going to be what it's going to cost to contribute to this, what is effectively an insurance fund, split between you, the employer, and the employee out of wages. So that's what it is right now. TBD for our April 9th CNADI.
We had a question from Kelly about this. Is there a size limit? Does it apply to all businesses, no matter how many employees? And does it affect part-time?
For size, I believe it's 14 or under. Employer does not have to contribute, but the employee may. I think 15 or higher, everybody has to contribute. Is again, off the top of my head, I believe that was the threshold. And then as far as part-time, I actually don't know if there is a part-time threshold.
I don't
covered
remember
employee.
that.
I don't remember seeing anything like that.
I don't, but I think one of the things that you mentioned, Steve, and to answer the question for the person who asked it, right? These are all things that I think could still be up in the air until we get to the final implementation phase. Even if it says 14 and below, no, that doesn't mean we get to the implementation date and they don't decide to change it. So we're going to be watching this carefully. This is something that I think is just huge news, especially having worked with this in other states. Just like you mentioned, Steve, we look around to our left and to our right, and we as a state and want to make sure we're keeping up and are also creating favorable work conditions, to keep jobs here and so forth. And so I think there's still TBD on that, but I did not see anything on part-time, but I would just, once we get to another stage where I can put the link in here, I'll post it. So I think it's a great idea for those of you who are on the call to maybe sign up for the newsletter, and that way you can get that information direct to your inbox as well, from the state.
And here's just FYI, the definition of covered employee is not full or part. It means an employee who worked at least 680 hours over the 12-month period immediately preceding the date on which leave is to begin. That's the current language from the statute. Obviously, things could change, but do the math there, what that translates to, over 12 months, per month, you can start figuring out what the numbers are in that scope, and whether that would cover your quote unquote part-time people.
Yeah, there's been a lot of conversation also about seasonals. All right.
Yeah.
All right, so now let's move on to safety. So this is going to be talking about an increase in penalties for MOSH Act violations. MOSH stands for the Maryland Occupational Safety and Health Act. I'm sure many of you are familiar with OSHA. MOSH is what we call, the same kind of agency, if you will, at the state level. The idea here is for employers who violate any of the MOSH Act are going to be subject to civil penalties, and we're looking to up to $7,000 for each violation, and then another $7,000 for each day that violation continues after the period of allowed for correction. And then I think the other key, I guess they like the number 7, is the $70,000 for willful or repeated violations. I wanted to just kind of underscore this piece around willful or repeated violations. When it comes to safety, and unfortunately, we've had some incidents in our state where people have been impacted due to workplace injuries, unfortunately, in cases even including death. I mean, these are situations that are significant and cannot be overlooked. And if you are going to be cited, or if this issue is something that the state determines was willful, meaning you knew about it perhaps, and you did nothing about it, which is another area that I tried to reinforce for my clients, is that, you can't overlook these issues, especially when it comes to safety. And the state is looking to impact and really reinforce this by increasing the penalties. The penalties, this is some detail down here. I won't go into it too much, but it's just talking about making sure that there will be situations where perhaps employers have been fined or they were required to take action before 2025. And so they talk about some limits there. I think the overall thing to understand and remind yourselves is if you are an employer and you have instances where people are working in environments, especially where they're working with equipment, they're working outdoors, they're working in environments that require PPE, for example. Those are just some of the many areas where some of these violations can occur. And, the state is taking this very seriously and increasing the penalties so that not only do we try to prevent these issues, but also really going after employers who are cited and then don't take the corrective actions. There's nothing worse than having something happen, trying to correct it, because unfortunately things can happen, accidents do happen, but if you know about it and do nothing, you will have a really, really challenging time, regardless of whatever insurance you may have, which is another thing I hear from employers is, oh, well, I have insurance for that. Don't always rely on thinking that you have all of the backup. Let's try to prevent the issue before it occurs.
Before
And
we leave safety on and look at
Yes.
Mosh a little bit, we had a question from Shelby. She was interested to find out, how does she find out if she is in compliance with Mosh requirements?
So I'll sort of jump on that because there are industry specific requirements depending on what you're doing, whether it's, hard hats on a workplace or don't walk under a beam being pulled by a crane across there's such hyper specific things within different work sites. The general concept is this idea that as an employer, you have an obligation to maintain a workplace free from recognized hazards. And to answer your question, one, we start from there. You got to either talk to your legal counsel, your HR consultants, and then MOSH, Maryland's version of OSHA, has a whole series of training opportunities that are available to you. So depending on the resources of your business, there are resources available to you. The general idea would be to make sure that you obviously have all your posters up. If you go to the Maryland Department of Labor website, you'll see a whole section on workplace safety that'll identify various posters that you should have up. That'll describe what your rights are, what you should be doing, what the employee can do to, remedy an issue and go from there. So depending on the type of business you have is going to sort of direct the compliance program you have. But the long and short of it is, what type of business do you have? What type of things are truly an open and obvious safety concern? And we need to have a procedure and policy in place to prevent that concern from injuring your workers. You can't prevent a worker from tripping over the carpet and falling and smashing their face. Like, that's not a MOSH violation. But if you have a construction company and you're saying, I'm just going to let every 18-year-old kid shoot out there with the staple gun and get up on the roof and put the shingles up without the cord and the hat and the thing and all the stuff, you're going to get a violation. So it's really specific to what services you're delivering. So that's it.
I would add one thing to that too. I don't think we mentioned having a safety program in place. You did mention policy, Stephen, but there are a lot of resources out there too from the state and the federal government, templates you can get started with that, Susan or I could help you build on, or your legal team. But having that program in place and doing regular training is going to create a lot of prevention. And I assume that, if it ever did cause you, if one of these incidents caused you a legal problem at some point, they would want to know that you have some sort of prevention in place.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just building on what you're saying too, Sam, one of the things, and I appreciate here that, the person who asked the question said that they're in the behavioral health space, and, depending on your business, things may look different. I was recently at our airport and was watching, actually I was flying from Mesa, this is the main airport, but no one was wearing gloves as they were refueling the plane, loading and unloading luggage and things like that. So, you know, a great example of also in your safety programs that Sam just mentioned, depending on the type of work folks provide, there's sometimes these kind of blaring, easy to address issues where you want to make sure people have, you know, PPE, that they're wearing preventive equipment, that they have access to things like that. And if you're not familiar with something like that, this is something we can help you with. And if you go to the website for MOSH, you will see there's a ton of resources there. There can be some sample checklists. You know, the idea though is you're making efforts, and that will always serve you well, is that you're trying to make sure that you address this. So if you have more questions on that, we can certainly help you. And Steve just put that into the chat. And then who helps create those policies and procedures, Christine, is a combination, I would say. It's a combination probably of whoever is internal in your business, you know it best. And then in conjunction with folks like the three of us, we can help you put together some policies and procedures. We can help you with a safety program, as Sam mentioned, in addition to whatever you have. But I would say the first step is make sure you have some policies and procedures. So I think you're already on your way if you were to put some things in place, especially letting people know that for certain roles and certain jobs, there is a requirement in how they get trained, how often, and the equipment that they need to be aware and be using. And again, I keep going back to protective equipment, right? Things as simple as hard hats and gloves and eye safety, like, you know, eye protection. These are very simple things that can go a long way in preventing an injury and making sure that those are standards in some of the ways you operate. Mark, I interrupted your ad.
Oh, no, I was just going to jump in about helping get the policies and procedures set, but you nailed it.
Okay, awesome. So this last item here on the safety side is something I want to bring everybody's awareness to. This went into effect on July 1st, and this is the expansion of the Maryland Indoor Clean Air Act. So today we all know that when you go to an indoor location in the state of Maryland, you can't smoke, right? We don't have a smoking section at restaurants anymore. Well, you can't vape indoors anymore either. And it's pretty interesting to me that people continue to do this discreetly in many cases, bathrooms, you know, in stores, bars, and so forth. It is no longer prohibited for you to vape. And what you're required to do is actually post signage at the entrances of your establishments that say that vaping is no longer permitted. So this download here that I've created, in case you're interested, you can download this, print it as many times as you want. It's a free resource. It's basically around no smoking and no vaping. So this is just an easy thing for you to be able to access and make sure that you are in compliance. We go back also to MOSH and we talk about violations. Here's a great example of also wanting to make sure that you have a responsibility to make sure your workplace is free from things like smoking and vaping. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Steve on classification.
All right, and I saw there was a question there about vape bars. There are a couple of exemptions to the law. Off the top of my head, without going into the statute, I would feel confident giving an assumption that if your industry is specifically a vape bar, that you probably fall into one of the exemptions on that. But I would, you know, they can't regulate out a whole business area without giving you your due process. So that's sufficient to say, double check your laws, as this thing just went into effect in July. So turning to classification here, there's sort of three areas during the process of employment, during the lifetime of employment, that we just want to highlight as we get into this. The first one, you know, doesn't have a whole lot of information on here. That's my doing, because I only brought this to Susan's attention this morning before we jumped on. But one of the things I wanted you all to hear is that the FLSA misclassification lawsuits are and have been one of the hottest areas of litigation, because it's designed, or the statutory scheme is designed to really stack the deck against employers from my perspective. Again, I represent employers, so I feel it's stacked against us. The idea is if you violate the FLSA, the traditional penalties are the dollar amount you should have paid times 2 plus the attorney's fees of the plaintiff's attorney who brings the case. So even when you have $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000, minor technical violations, they add up, right? Double the amount, and then the attorney who brings a federal lawsuit to remedy it is not charging $2,000 to do that case. It's $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for a misclassification case. So I want to highlight the importance here, and the reason why it's a current issue is because as of July 1st, 2024, the salary threshold for you to be classified as exempt raised significantly. So we went from I think it was about $684 to $844 a week, which is about 43 and change, I think it is. And then that number is going to jump into the high 50,000s January 1 of 2025. So you have this narrow window where you're doing a couple $100 a week jump. Then you're going to jump significantly up into the thousands per week in order to maintain your exempt status. Now that's just one part of it. It's the job duties must also be satisfied. So if you're an executive employee, a manager, you're supervising 2 or more full-time employees, making the decision to hire and fire, making independent discretionary decisions, and getting paid at least in the mid 40s to mid 50s. So with these things jumping, the reason why during employment it's significant is because you may have just said it and forget it. Hey, I did the offer letter with Sam whenever I hired him, I'm cool. That's not the case. As these things change, the salary level is lifting out of where you may have them hired, in which case now they're doing a job that may still be management or whatever, but because you don't meet that salary threshold, you must pay them overtime. You must track the hours that the person's being paid. There's a bunch of administrative things that come into play. So it's very important at this stage of the game to track to track where your employees are and to regularly evaluate it. Because the third component of this rule that went into effect July 1st is that the salary threshold will be increased annually based upon the consumer, I believe it's the consumer price index, but it's something along inflationary measures. So the idea is it's going to go up, and it's not going to be a set it and forget it like it was at 455 for, 10 years, I think it was, maybe 15 years. So in this case, it's something to pay attention. You got to put a tickler on your calendar to chase it down and make sure that your guys and gals that you have employed are meeting these thresholds so you don't get dinged with an FLSA misclassification lawsuit. And bonuses do count for the person who asked the question. It is an unpleasant addition to the calculation of salaries. There is a portion of them that can count. The main base threshold must remain. The way bonuses count in all of this is that they count in what's calculated for purposes of overtime. So whenever you say, just the salary is what you have to hit, you must have a base level. You can say the greater of the base level or the bonus or the commission or whatever the case may be, but you must always be hitting the base level. Then if you don't hit that base level and there's bonuses out there in the world, those bonuses must be factored into what the regular rate is for purposes of calculating overtime. So it is a whole thing that you have to chase and track to make sure that you're not blowing this classification on the FLSA side. I saw a handful of other questions pop up. There's one anonymous thing that I would ask to email me separately so that I don't change your anonymous question into a general question. And then the general question about, can somebody share a link about Maryland's current exempt and non-exempt requirements? There are 2 places that we can look, and we'll see if we can toss the link in there. But there's the FLSA fact sheets that you find at the Department of Labor's website. Each one of those is a great starting point. And then Maryland's Department of Labor website. Let me see if I might actually have this right off the bat. And if I do, I'm going to be very proud of myself.
I saw them there yesterday, Steve.
Perfect.
They're there. There's a section on pay when you go to the Maryland Department of Labor. There's prevailing wage, there's living wage, there's all sorts of information there on pay. And so for the person who also asked the question, it can also feel pretty monstrous. So don't let that discourage you. But that's also why you have resources here. If we can help you navigate that, let us know, because some of these things also can be, you might be unsure how to apply it and how that might look, but there are some great resources on that website, Maryland Wise. Oh, there
Absolutely. And again, the idea here is these websites give you enough information to be dangerous. You need to, if you're unsure, whatever the case may be, your business is specific to you. You need to talk to Sam, Susan, or myself, or your existing employment counsel to make sure that what you're doing matches what's on there. Because if this was easily understandable at the end of the day, there wouldn't be hundreds of lawsuits filed a day related to FLSA violations. So with that, let's jump into the next one. The non-compete rule, this has been the real hot and sexy issue for HR, right? It's this big, flashy new law that affects everybody and their mother. Non-competes are supposed to be dead September 4th, 2024. There are three, all this information here, the crux of it is you cannot have a non-compete enforced for your rank and file folk after September 4th for any business that's subject to the FTC's regulations jurisdiction. So there's a handful of things that don't fit in, like a bona fide nonprofit, for example. That's why a lot of hospitals aren't covered by this. But the long and short of it is if you have a business that is, dependent on what we call restricted covenants, it's the whole world of non-competes, non-solicits, non-disclosure agreements. You need to pay heed here and say, what am I really getting from my non-compete versus the protections that are given to me by my non-solicit and my confidentiality protections? And the reason I bring this up this way is because the non-solicits, that's protecting your employee relationships, that's protecting your client relationships, and to, a more specific basis, sometimes referral basis relationships. Or if you have very well-developed relationships with some vendors, sometimes you can use non-solicits to protect that relationship as well. So it's important to reevaluate why you have these different agreements in place. If you're sitting there and saying, I just don't want Jimmy Smith working next door to me, that's not going to be good enough. You need to say, well, I don't want Jimmy Smith working next door to me because he's going to call all of my clients to come next door. Well, if that's the case, then we put the non-solicitation in place and that prevents him from doing so. But you can't stop Jimmy Smith from working next door anymore. So that's sort of the world. Now, the issue here that I want to talk about in the context of current employees. If your current employees, if you had them sign a non-compete or a restrictive covenant whenever they came on board, this law is going to require that we send a notice to those employees expressly telling them this will no longer be enforced against you. That's what this law is designed to do. Right now, it's facing three distinct federal lawsuits, one in Texas, one in Pennsylvania, one in Florida. If you had to guess, you'd probably be right. Florida and Texas said FTC doesn't have the authority to do this right now. And the big ticket one is Texas. That's the one that is pending a decision right now that is supposed to come out August 30th on whether or not this law moves forward. Pennsylvania said they do have the authority. The FTC does have the authority to enter this rule. So it creates a really unpleasant web of contradictory law. Now, what I anticipate here is that the Texas law or the Texas case is going to put their decision out, right, wrong, and different on August 30th. I don't think you can wait till August 30th to come up with a plan. So my recommendation here is that you have sort of a 3-part plan. One, you got to inventory and review your existing non-competes. You got to sit down and say, I got 20 of them. They all flow through here. Do they or don't they meet the requirements that are going to go away that I need to send a notice to? You need to plan to have notices prepared to be sent out in the event this rule goes into effect. And then finally, you need to have sort of another game plan. How do you prepare to protect your business in the absence of basically a physical non-compete? So you need to look at yourself and say, my most important thing is my secret recipe of herbs and spices. Well, if that's the case, you need to have a really rock star confidentiality agreement in place, and you need to have policies and procedures in place in your handbook and in your basically your document access or your information access policies that spells out who can have access, who cannot, and what happens, when you grant access, what are the controls over that? Those types of things will protect your information. You'll have a protection from a breach of contract action for them if somebody does take your info. And you'll also have protection for what's called a misappropriation of trade secrets case. Both federal and state law protects your trade secrets, but only if you take these steps to protect it. So that's sort of what you have to do in a nutshell here is you got to evaluate where you're sitting in terms of non-competes. You got to plan for, if this law does go into effect, getting your notices out the door. And you got to have a plan for how to protect your business in the absence of a non-compete. So that's the non-compete stuff at the end of the day here. What do we have? I think we have one more here. This is your standard, what's going on at the state level in Maryland. We have healthcare professionals and veterinarian professionals and low-income employees all being subject to avoid what's basically going to avoid non-competes for those three categories of folk in descending order. So the first order was low-income employees making up to 150% of the minimum wage in Maryland, which again is roughly $45,000, can't have a non-compete. And that's been in existence for a while. As of June 1st, veterinarian practitioners and vet techs also have non-compete voiding after June 1st. So not things beforehand, but things afterwards. So if you were to say you discovered a violation today for something that happened today, that likely couldn't be enforced. And then finally, the one that's going to go into effect July 1st of 2025, anybody licensed under the Healthcare Professionals Act in Maryland. So your doctors, your nurse practitioners, those folks who have to get a license through the state under the healthcare article, you can't have non-competes with them either unless their total compensation is over $350,000. And then in that case, it's limited to 1 year, 10 miles from the office in which they worked. So if you have associate physicians working for you who are making $200 to $250 or something like that, you can't have a geographic non-compete with them. It's just not going to be enforceable after July 1st, 2025. So this is the Maryland state level items that are going to exist that you have to balance with the FTC's rule. So one way or another, what this should signal to you is find a different way to protect your business than a traditional geographic non-compete. Thou shalt not compete with me within 25 miles or something like that. How about the next slide? So this is sort of changing gears a little bit, getting into the independent contractor world. Again, when you are operating your business during employment, I've heard time and time again people say, well, my 1099 employees, they're over here, they do this, and there's no such thing. You're either 1099, which is an independent contractor, or you're an employee. And this new rule that came out from the Department of Labor really tries to look at the whole picture of the scope of the world for the employee to determine whether they truly are an employee or they're an independent contractor. If you misclassify your employee as an independent contractor, it's a bad day for you. Taxes, minimum and overtime wages, a variety of the other employment laws like the workplace safety, unemployment, all of those things apply to an employee. If you misclassify somebody as an employee who's probably an independent contractor, it's almost a no harm, no foul. So, it's always important to err on the side of employee versus independent contractor. And the rule of thumb that I give everybody, and I'm going to give you again here, is does it look like your plumber? If you're sitting there and you've got a drip in your sink and you're saying, I don't know how to fix that. I don't have the tools to fix that. I don't have the time to fix that. Mr. Plumber Man, come out and please fix this for me. They come out on a range of, we'll be there between 8 and 5 on a Saturday afternoon, right? You don't know. They're coming on their own schedule. That's part one. They're bringing their own tools. That's part two. They're doing it with their own expertise at their own schedule and planning their own amount of money to be able to dictate how much they make from your interaction. They come in, they fix it, they leave, you pay them. Temporary relationship. All of those things weigh in favor of that person being an independent contractor. Use that rule of thumb. If it doesn't look like your plumber, call Sam, Susan, or myself, and we'll help you work through whether it's appropriate or not to maintain that relationship as an independent contractor. So as you're moving forward in your business and you're doing different things, this is definitely one of those things that we heard early on. Well, everybody treats them as independent contractors. Like I said at the very beginning, don't be the person who gets their hand caught in the cookie jar first for all your friends to say, ooh, maybe not anymore. So with that, that's all I've got on the independent contractor world. What do we have next, Susan?
Q&A.
Any questions out of the gate that haven't been answered yet?
Okay, I didn't see, no questions yet, but if you do have questions, please email them to Stephen, Susan, or Samantha. And before we leave, I think, am I seeing a question coming in? Yeah, if you guys can pop there's a slide. We're going to get the slides out to you, and on the slides we'll have the contact email address for our three panelists. So it's been a pretty productive hour, a lot of information, but the other thing that's important is continuing to operate your business in an effective manner where you don't get slowed down because you have run afoul of some employment law or regulation that you're unfamiliar with. That's our goal here from the chamber, to keep you informed so you can keep up to and not be slowed down and continue to grow your business. So I'm going to stop the recording now. And recording.